Shalom, friends. How are we doing today? This is Chief Mahto. I'm going to open up this meeting in prayer. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Heavenly Father, please watch over us, keep us safe from harm and accident, allow us to utilize our knowledge and all of our sevenfold armor of Yahuwah to be able to move forward all of our people towards your common goal. Thank you so much for your insight, for your wisdom, and the love which you've shown us. We say this in thy son, Yahusha's name. All right, friends. So we have a few people that should be hopefully joining us today. I'm going to call my subject matter expert, Robert, up here and see if he'd like to chat for a little bit. As usual, if he wants to talk, I'm going to let him talk, because that's why we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, is so that we listen more than we actually speak. So the one thing I've always shared with my sons is that even a fool appears wise until he opens his mouth and removes all doubt. So let's make sure that we give everybody who is a subject matter expert that proper forum in the floor, not only because it's intelligent, but because that's actually one of our tribal traditions. Nothing can get you in trouble faster in a village than to actually piss off one of the elders. So that's why we always want to make sure that we're doing things correctly. Now, here today we have a friend of ours, Troy. He wants to discuss the 12 presumptions of court. And I'm going to roll through this really fast in terms of my best interpretation of what my opinion is. Again, I do not give legal advice. I give legal opinions. And because of that, I'm not going to be held accountable for anybody else's stupidity. If you decide to run off and do something, that's on you. That's not me. But what we do is we act at all times with integrity and make sure that we are doing things in a proper, legal, and lawful manner. So that's what separates us from all of the knuckle-dragging troglodytes that want to be like us but really don't have that yet. So that's what we're going to do, is help them out, be able to protect them and get them to that same detente. Can you guys all see this? I'm going to assume if you can't see it that you'll say something. It's screen sharing.
Yeah, I know it's screen sharing, but we are only seeing a warning on the other side. I don't know why.
Here, let me show you.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, 12 presumptions.
We're showing something else.
All right, so now we can see this. If you can't see it, I'm assuming you'll put it in the chat. Again, we'll go through this right now, and then afterwards, if you have any questions after I'm done reading the document, please then ask the questions. If we ask them in the middle, not only generally is it going to probably be answered by the time we get to the end, but it throws off the entire rhythm. So please just write down or put it in the chat. That's good as well if you have any questions, okay? So let's move forward here under the 12 presumptions of the court, starting with Canon 3228. What is canon law? Canon law is ecclesiastical law. Who owns all of the canon law? The Catholic Church. It's actually licensed, it's copyrighted and trademarked. That's why one has to have a license to practice law to be in their court. So whenever you walk into their court and you have not yet filed a notice of special appearance, then one makes a general appearance. And by making a general appearance, one necessarily extends jurisdiction to these people. So posted on 14, okay? Researcher ferreted out these presumptions. So that means that these are written down somewhere in the British Accreditation Regency. If you look at that website for the bar or British Accreditation Regency, you'll see that they have a litany of different corporate entities that they license. Why? Because that obscures what their true intent is. What is the true intent? It's to operate all nisi prius courts that enslave all mankind. Let me repeat that. It's to operate all nisi prius courts to enslave all mankind under what? Admiralty law. What is admiralty law? It has been around since the Phoenicians, since the Canaanites, since all these other people who used to operate ships on the ocean. Was it in the exact form it is today? No. What did it look like? It looked different language, but much of the same terminology is there, at least in functionality, especially when you're talking about banking entities and things done there. So the fruit of a poisonous tree is actually a legal term. And that means that if something was obtained, this generally refers to search warrants. But if the information from a search warrant was obtained illegally, then that means everything that came from that is fruit of the poisonous tree and must be necessarily thrown out of the case. This is how sickos walk sometimes. It's a technicality. So the scheme also provided for the control of the courts via the 1913 creation of the American Bar Association. That was not when it was created. It was created in 1879. That's when it was created. The European International Bar Association was a creation of the Rothschilds. Who owns the currency? Who sits atop the Masonic structures? Who are the generational families from the Italian lines? That is Rothschilds. That name child is in there for a reason. This allows them to practice law. What type of law? Is it biblical law? No. It is legal. That's the difference between legal and lawful. Lawful means God's law. Legal means the undoing of God's law. Go look it up in the Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition. That's literally what it means. So it's admiralty law or contract law. So who owns the United Postal Union? England. This is how all commerce was conducted and traded back in the day before we had states, computers, fax machines, and whatnot. It was all done via the mail, generally registered mail. Why? Because that creates a contract. That's why if you put a registered mail piece on the Postal Service counter, the second they stamp that, it goes into a locked box. Okay? Hold on one second. I'm going to get Robert on the line with this. Forgot to do that originally. We'll just see if he wants to talk first. If not, I'll let him also weigh in on these. But hold on one second. Bringing him on, see if he answers. Robert. Hey, brother, you there?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. So can everybody else, I believe. But we are covering the 12 assumptions of the bar right now. If you want to chime in at any point, go ahead and do that. Okay. But I'm just covering it for one of the members real fast. All right. Okay, here we go. So the common law of the people to be replaced as it gave the natural man many jurisdictional protections from the bankers' legislations. Why? Because the bankers all work in commerce. They're in the fictional realm, the matrix. A Roman court does not operate according to any true rule of law, but by presumptions of the law. So unless those presumptions are negated or refuted and that is put on the public or court record, then that means that their assumptions and presumptions will stand. Here are the key assumptions, okay? Private bar guilds. And if they're unchallenged, they stand being true, okay? The presumption of public record is that any matter brought before a lower Roman court is a matter for the public record when in fact it is presumed by the members of the private bar guild that the matter is a private bar guild business matter. Why is it private? Because you're not part of the club. Very simple. The presumption of public service is that all the members of the private bar guild who have all sworn a solemn, secret, absolute oath to their guild then act as public agents of the government or public officials by making additional oaths of public office that openly and deliberately contradict their private superior oaths to their own guild. What oath is that? That is the oath to the bar. If you read that oath, it says their oath and their duty first is to the court, not to the client. We don't see that on TV, do we? We're told that it's, oh no, I'm here to protect my client. No, you're not. You're there to put your client in dishonor by actually filing a plea rather than a plea in abatement, asking them, hey, you know, I know you think you have something going here, but can you please prove to me how in the hell I got before you? Where your authority is. Pretty sure I read somewhere in the 6th Amendment to the Constitution for 1789, I have a right to confront my accuser or know the cause and the nature of this action. Right now, I'm more confused than a nun on a honeymoon, Judge. Can you tell me how we got here? Is there a contract? Is this a criminal action? Is it a civil action? Because if it's a criminal action, the laws for this nation only allow 2 types of criminal courts. One of them is Article 3 court that requires a victim. The other one is a condition of contract in an admiralty jurisdiction. So unless I see one of these, I have yet to understand how we're standing here. These are the presumptions that you must overcome and be able to stand on that square in front of any one of these Title 4D Section 666 agents. So number 3, presumption of public oath is that all members of the private bar guild acting in the capacity of quote unquote public officials who have sworn a solemn public oath remain bound by that oath and therefore bound to serve honestly, impartially, and fairly as dictated by their oath. Look at those words, honestly, impartiality, and fairly. If you're not a part of the club that's sitting there adjudicating the matter and they all stand to gain financially from it, can you be impartial? Can you have a judge sit there and adjudicate a matter having to do with the driver's license if the judge has a driver's license? I would call that a clear conflict of interest, Judge. Do you pay taxes? Then what permission do you have to speak to me? You're clearly conflicted. I don't pay taxes because the Constitution says in no less than 2 places for 1789, Indians not taxed. I'm not part of your society. You have to be able to articulate that, or again, the presumption stands. Immunity is that key members of the private bar guild in the capacity of public officials acting as judges, prosecutors, and magistrates who have sworn a solemn public oath in good faith are immune from personal claims of injury and liability. Is that true? There was an attorney who actually went against the bar, got disbarred, ended up with like a $2 trillion debt against the, I believe, state of Washington. And then in COVID, he sold that to the government of Greece and then skipped town. How was he able to do that? He was able to do that in the UCC. That's where these guys file all their stuff. Robert is our resident expert on that. I'm sure he'll cover that at some point if he doesn't mind, but let's go to the 5th presumption. And by the way, that immunity, of course, is if it's an American or a US citizen that's trying to file that lien. If it is in fact a foreign grantor's trust based outside of the Hague jurisdiction for abduction or adoption, and that lien holder files the lien, where does that case get adjudicated if it's not in the Hague jurisdiction? Lots of questions there for us to discuss later. Summons is that by custom a summons unrebutted stands, and therefore one who attends court is presumed to accept a position. Who do we summon? The dead. These are all caps entities. Why does an attorney represent? Because it's a dead entity. It has to be represented. That's why they cannot hear the living man. That's why you must claim the name when you walk in, or they cannot proceed. Why? Because you have to give them jurisdiction. They're standing there pretending to be the beneficiary and accusing you of not managing your minor estate properly. Thus, they have to step in an hour entitled to remuneration for their activities. It's all horseshit designed as law. Presumption of custody is that by custom a summons or a warrant for arrest unrebutted stands, and therefore one who attends court is presumed to be a thing and therefore liable to be detained in custody by custodians. So what are they talking about? Remember, we live in a bankrupt economy. There is no money. So the only way to create money is to create debts. So when one walks in there and you plead, that means that you've accepted. You've accepted the debt. Now you are the surety. You're no longer the implied surety. The lowercase spelling is the implied surety, the man. But when you walk in and you claim that name, you say, yeah, that's me. Okay, well, great. Now you're the surety. We're going to hold your body as surety for any debts, bonds, liens that we file and sell out there on the stock market so it can be hypothecated. This is what Revelation is talking about when it says the souls of men. This is how they are bought and sold. So how do you get into that custody? You contract it in. How? Driver's license, selective service registration, bunch of other things. If you go get that form from the post office, I was just going over that with Albert. It literally says on there, it's a felony to not file for selective service. And it clearly says US citizens and foreigners. And it means not immigrants, not state citizens. So it's really, are we overstanding what we are reading? Clearly not. Number 7. Presumption of court of guardians, presumption that you may be listed as a resident of a ward or a local government area and have listed on your passport the letter P. It means you're a pauper and therefore under the guardian powers of the government and its agents as courts of guardians. In other words, you're incompetent. That minor estate, Sesquibi Trust Act of 1666, this is how they converted all lands to be able to be taken later. Why? Because you're presumed to be dead and lost at sea after 7 years. After the age of 18, if you do not come back to claim you're a minor estate, you're a voter. You're never going to be an elector. You have to understand the difference of what's being described in these two constitutions between a Fourth Amendment citizen and a 14th Amendment U.S. citizen, British territorial subject, and property of the Vatican. This is why the Mahto tribe is owned by Yahuwah, Mahto Ministries, because they cannot claim that we belong to their foreign Elohim. We belong to the Most High and His Son. We follow their laws. Why? Because it's our right in the Republic to do so peacefully and lawfully. Let's continue. 8. Presumption of Court of Trustees is that members of the private bar guild presume you accept the office of trustee as a public servant and government employee just by attending a Roman court. Why? Because you're considered to be a government employee as a U.S. citizen. That's why you have to pay taxes. That's why you have to have a driver's license, even though you may not be engaged in hauling products, people, or working for the government. If you are a U.S. military veteran and your DD 214 has not been altered by you going back and correcting it, you're still assumed to be under the authority and jurisdiction of the U.S. military. You're still considered to be recallable at any time. Why do we have a draft? Because we had enough ignorant Americans that did not understand that they were talking to their subjects. That if they'd had this knowledge, they could have put the proper notices in place, and there is no draft. Why? Did the Amish get drafted? Did the Hutterites, the Mennonites? Why didn't they get drafted? When you start utilizing logic and you have the ability to think, which is the one critical thing men today do not do, they refuse to think. Why? Because they're too busy pulling on themselves, or they're too busy playing fantasy games. They don't want to deal with reality. And again, would we expect to see this prediction somewhere? Yes, in the scriptures it says, in the last days, men will become lovers unto themselves. Why? Probably because the vast majority of men have already been run through this family law court system. They've had their offspring taken away. I've worked with 22 veterans a month over the last 5 years who took their lives because of combat-related issues, PTSD. I have 33 dads a month who take their lives because some asshole took their kids. That's unacceptable to me. It's unacceptable to do that to any of my babies. Presumption of government acting in two roles as executor and beneficiary is that for the matter at hand, the private bar guild appointed the judge, magistrate in the capacity of executor. Why? Because they're claiming you're not managing your minor estate properly. Remember, the public has rights. That means that you can't be out there acting like a dumbass and not expect to be brought to task for it. If you're endangering the public, if you've committed a crime, if you're in the process of committing a crime, you're subject to whatever authority is there. By the way, if you read the Constitution, your fellow U.S. citizens could arrest you. Why is that? Because they have a right to public safety. That's what the presumption of the government is that the judge has been appointed to come in and act as the arbitrator in this sense, but the beneficiary, make no mistake about it, is going to be that court. Why? Because it's a private corporate entity. And when I was explaining municipal tax-free bond funds to my client, I said, these are tax-free. At the time, I didn't understand why. I do now. It's because the feds can't tax state issuances and vice versa. And it's because none of us are actually filing the required paperwork to make sure these guys are paying taxes on these debts. This is why if you look up the all caps assumed business name out of Idaho, Marcus Troy Ream, in the Pierce County record, you will see there was an $83,073 lien against that estate. That was the amount in exact dollars and cents for the draft that I put against my private registered surety bond, assign that to the U.S. Treasury. Why? Because all debts belong to the U.S. according to the Act of 1933. So every Mahto and Sioux member that joins the tribe, two things happen. First, the relinquishment and changing of U.S. citizenship back to American Indian national status. And the assignment of all value, everything in that minor estate to our treasury. Why? Because we're here to help our country. That's why. And could we manage it? Sure, but should we be? No. They can take $1,000 and turn it into $1 billion. Why would we try to get in the middle of that? That would be like Forrest Gump going to MIT and trying to teach math. We shouldn't be there. The same reason that the chief hasn't placed himself as the leader nationally of my people. I don't belong there. Trump belongs there. Where I belong is helping at the local level to make sure our kids can't be taken away anymore by 304s and complicit attorneys in the Bar Association who've taken an oath to a foreign government. They follow foreign Elohim. They literally are invoking satanic law on our offspring because we do not know any better. Like the scriptures say, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. So if you're here and you're allowing these presumptions to stand, again, that is your fault. Number 10, presumption of executor de son tort is a presumption that the accused does seek to assert their right as executor and beneficiary over their body, mind, and soul. They are acting as an executor de son tort or a false executor, challenging the rightful judge as executor. Why is that? Because executor is a financial term. Instead of walking in sui juris or in propria persona, which in their language means in my proper person, or better yet, having documentary evidence that you've been placed as a domestic agent in commerce or authorized representative for that all caps name. By who? By the foreign grantor trustee sitting outside the Hague jurisdiction. I'm just here to manage this estate, Judge. I can't, I'm the trustee in that sense. I'm a foreign trustee. I have this name change document with one of your brethren proving I'm not that all caps name, that this is actually my name. This is how I spell it. Here's my power of attorney. Here is my executor affidavit. What is that for? That tells them what to do with the account. Why? Because I'm the entitlement holder. I'm not the holder in due course. That's now the Treasury. I've assigned that to them. I'm the entitlement holder. That means I have a right to utilize that unlimited discharge account number on the back of the Social Security card. Mine has an H in front of it. Why? Because all Native American accounts are in St. Louis. Your letter will designate which one of those 12 private foreign banking entities your account is at. So unless we come in and we undo the presumption of being just an executor, no. This is biblical ecclesiastical trust law, Judge. This isn't here in your commercial realm. So moving forward, the presumption of incompetence is a presumption that you are at least ignorant of the law, therefore incompetent to present yourself and argue properly. How do they know that? Because you walked in with an attorney and proved it. That's how. Well, I've walked in before and they just keep moving forward and there's nothing I can do about it. I get it. It's a sickening feeling. Why? Because you can't stop what you can clearly see to be human trafficking disguised as law. You know you hurt no one. So why am I standing in here? Why are my freedoms? Why is my money? Why is my peace being threatened? It's because somebody here wants to pretend that I'm a criminal. Why do they want to pretend that I'm a criminal? So that they can charge me with whatever they wish. When in reality, I'm actually a law-abiding man. So when you get into these court hearings, you undo these presumptions. That's exactly what you're looking at. You have to take it off of their record and push some other information admitted into evidence of one's status of not only not being incompetent, but also called a live life claim. Why? Because these are all dead entities. So one has to have a live life claim or they will be able to presume that you're not. Just like you can't answer to the name, you have to give evidence that one is not that name. Presumption of guilt is a presumption that as it is presumed to be a private business meeting of the Bar Guild, you are guilty whether you plead guilty, do not plead, or plead not guilty. Why is that? Because you have not prepared an affidavit of truth. What is an affidavit? an affidavit of or anything, unless rebutted, stands as evidence in a court of law. Why? Because nobody else said it's not true. It's the same assumptions that they're using, correct? Unless we rebut those assumptions, then they stand as evidence in their world. It's no different than doing a private administrative process utilizing a notary. That's the entire point behind, hey, you have 10 days to respond why this isn't true. You sent me a bill, which means that we are engaged in commerce. That means I have a duty to respond, or I acquiesce to everything you put in your bullshit letter. So now I'm going to tell you, sure, I conditionally accept what you sent to me if you can do this, this, and this. The first this is obviously show me, prove to me, give me evidence. Is there a contract? Do you have damages? Do you have an injury that I have caused you? It's called Lujan versus Defenders of Wildlife. Go read that case. It explains that unless somebody has a concrete and particularized injury in fact, there is no injury. So what do the Bar Association Guild members do? They obscure your ability to relieve or receive generally any type of relief by utilizing court procedures or other BS mechanisms, in spite of the fact that Miranda v. Arizona says, where substantive rights are concerned, there can be no rulemaking which would abrogate them. That means nobody can come up with a bunch of rules, federal, state, otherwise, that basically provide a barrier to remedy. It's very simple if you look at my own case. Law-abiding man stops trying to be a law-abiding man under the guise of officer safety. My weapons are taken from me for supposedly called safekeeping. What does that mean? In their world, it means you do not get them back. I had the prosecutor for the Kitsap County Prosecutor's Office admit that. They're not allowed to give them back. That should bother every veteran who believes that we have a Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, the operative word being keep. That means not subject to seizure by any little foreigner running around with their car claiming that I've done something wrong, and that's the exegesis that they created, the mendacity in their own mind, to stop my peaceful, lawful travels. I walked across the border to Mexico. How did I do that? I showed him my tribal ID. I said, I'm an Indian. He said, where's your passport? I said, I'm an Indian. I don't use them. He didn't bat an eye. He waved me through. He said, get a passport. Yeah, I got you. Whatever. But coming back through, that's when it got interesting. Why? The same reason I told you I brought my rabbi friend in, because I want the message for the truth of the gospel to come through him. I recognize the fact that I'm not soft enough anymore to deliver that message. And that's when I told the guy at the border, excuse me, are you pretending, Mr. Offspring of some foreigner who landed on our shores in 1492, that you have a right to tell me where I might roam on my own indigenous lands? Is that what you're telling me? The conversation ends there. This was the same conversation I was having with everybody who was asking, what is the premise behind the tribe? The premise behind the tribe is that we are the only indigenous tribe of American state citizen nationals who have not only provided first in time, first in line notice that we actually have superior title claim to all of these lands. Why? Because we were here thousands of years before you showed up, Jack. When you guys were still subduing all of the Muslims over in the Holy Land, my people were here. We may have been dragging our property behind dogs using travois, but we were still here. Our medicine wheel was here. The progenitors, ancestors of Chief Mahto were here. We did not have 12 presumptions. What we had was a tribal council. We had men on that council. Why? Because it's logic driven, not emotion. Because they have the ability to actually enforce any type of law that they wish, which is the entire premise behind the common law. It is the common mores and norms of that society, so long as they do not interfere with constitutional laws for the republic or obvious international laws. What's an obvious international law? You don't hurt non-enemy combatants. You do not come in and slaughter women and children. What happened to the original indigenous tribes, the 100 million people who were here, who failed to recognize the superior technology of our visitors? They paid the price. Now you have one that has come out in these last days to be able to provide a mechanism, because he was grafted in through the line of who? The tribe of Judah. And every American who joins the Mahto tribe is grafted into the kingdom of Yahuwah. That means you no longer belong to the Vatican. It's very simple. You now belong to a tribe of American Indians. Why? Because you said so. You put evidence on the record, didn't you? You said that, hey, guess what? I have an oath to, or I affirm my allegiance to the Republic of the United States. I was a U.S. military veteran in this branch or this branch or this branch. If I didn't make it clear then, because I once was blind, but now I see, I'm an American. I'm not a U.S. citizen. Let me repeat that. I'm an American. Why? Because all Mahto members are Americans. That's the only color we recognize. If you're a U.S. citizen, you're an immigrant, you're an undocumented whatever. You're not part of our society. You don't exist to us. You have to choose to be in our society as much as you must choose and ask to be in the Masons. Why do you think you have to ask? If you know anything about the Masonic doctrine, the principles, what they follow, you have to believe in some most high, just like the tribe. What's the difference? They're most high. If you read the writings of Albert Pike, Lucifer was their light bearer. Who's their new light bearer? JC. I won't say the name of foreign Elohim. But if the J doesn't appear in Hebrew and it only showed up in the last 500 years, and the name of the Most High and his Son have been taken out of the actual Torah, out of all of the original scriptures that were written in Hebrew, go read about the Dead Sea Scrolls. They weren't in Greek, they weren't in Latin. So why were they written in Greek and Latin? So that you don't know the name of the Most High. 6,400 times it was taken out under the guise of what? Oh, it's such a holy name, you're not supposed to say it. Really? Show me where it says that in the scriptures. Well, you're being awfully legalistic. Great. Another word, I want you to point out where that is in the scriptures. Because I demand that, if you're going to call yourself a believer, you follow on the right day. If you follow on the correct day, you understand the Old Testament. You understand when you walk into any court exactly how to undo these presumptions. Look at what you have read through. Juxtapose that against what you know of the Old Testament, what you know of the New Testament, where Yahusha said, agree with your brother on the way to the court. Why? Because you were accepting whatever they're charging you with. I accept the charges, not the crimes, Judge. I'm going to repeat that 3 times, just like on the Wizard of Oz. If you think that was just merely imagery, check out when that came out. Who do we have? We have a yellow brick road. Where are they trying to get to? They're trying to get to the wizard behind the curtain. Those who call themselves Jews, but are they of the synagogue of Satan? They're not Yahuwah's chosen people. They're imposters. How do you know that? You will know them by their fruit. What is their fruit? Trafficking of offspring in Americans and Admiralty law jurisdictions. How? Because we're raised in their school system. If you want to find out who's at the top of anything, look who doesn't raise their kids in public school. It's those same individuals at the top. If you look throughout history, they literally brought Constantine to his knees. Why? Because they have a religion when everybody else is trying to practice a society. Let me say that again. They have a religion when everybody else is practicing a society. If you have ever heard of Business Networking International, what is that about? That's about a group of business owners in any county who come together and decide to trade business amongst themselves. Combine resources for the betterment of the group themselves. You can see this today in the form of unions, kind of. Why do I say kind of? Because where do unions usually show up? Anywhere where there's public money. Docks, utilities, anything that's guaranteed to allow them to be able to charge Davis-Bacon wages for shit that should be done at 15 an hour. Why is that? So that they can artificially inflate all of their gross margins, thereby increasing their bottom line. That's the shortened version. It's about money. And they have entrenched themselves in these areas specifically because it guarantees them a revenue stream going forward. That's why they are there. So for us to properly detach, for us to properly be able to stand on our square in any one of these jurisdictions, it begins with understanding exactly the nature of the action that you're standing in. You must understand admiralty law. This is a good start. Thank you, Troy, for sharing them. Are there any questions, people?
Yes, I have a number.
Please.
I didn't know if your friend online or your rabbi was going to say anything first before I begin.
Nope, he's not here today. The guy that I called was Robert. You guys know who he is. He's on here with us now, just listening. If he wants to say anything, he knows he's always welcome to chime in.
Okay. So if we're going to rebut the presumptions, what would the document look like when we submit it to the court, and when would that happen?
Have you ever submitted an affidavit?
Yes, but I still don't know if it's even done correctly.
One subject, one verb. Because how do they respond to a complaint?
I have no idea.
It's line by line. Then they have to say denied, agreed, or without knowledge. Those are the only three proper responses in their rules of procedure. So your affidavit says they did this on this date. They have to respond. Yes, no, without knowledge. That's why you want one subject, one verb. There's something that you guys should all spend $220 on. It is How to Win in Court Without a Lawyer by a guy named Frederick Graves, former attorney.
Yes. I
Any
know
other
the
questions?
place. Okay, so I can do that. So what happens now if I'm in the middle of the case and I wake up, much like when you start to realize that you're not a US citizen, that you're an American. When you wake up in the middle of a court case, you're like, I haven't submitted any of these. What do you do now?
Well, when you submit something on the record, right? If they do not respond to it, how do they move forward?
I don't know.
They can't. There's a guy
So-
out there, his name was, what's his name? Oh, McDonald. McDonald said, if you get to a trial, you fail.
Correct.
So that means that you need to be able to undo all these presumptions, and it's right here in front of us, right? It's canon law. That's Vatican law. That's who writes that code. It's the Pope.
Okay, so with that then, is the document that I would submit, or do I actually read it when there's a hearing before the process? I mean, I'm not sure how to submit that. I'm trying to figure out what I need to do that.
What do you have as evidence that a document has been submitted into the court record? Who does that for you?
Well, nobody's ever done it for me. I've had to do that.
No, the clerk's done it. The clerk's stamp is what says it's in the court record. So if you've created something, it's been notarized. Notary is what?
It's a testimony.
Notary is evidence that you autographed that document, and that notary's journal can be brought into court. That's a specific reason for a notary. And if you sent that registered mail or you sent that via certified mail, in the presence of two witnesses, let the truth be established. If you live by biblical law, are you going to come in with man's evidence, or are you going to come in with biblical evidence?
Biblical.
So you come in with not only your registered mail or your certified mail piece, but You have the notary that says, no, 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 Troy signed this. He submitted it. Here's the clerk that says that you guys have received proper notice. See what I mean?
Okay. So I
Now-
can do it anytime within a case.
Correct. Now, they may screw you at the local level, but
Yeah.
I promise you that by the time it gets to the appeal, that's where these cases start disappearing from what I'm told. Why? Because at the appeal level, it literally will become part of the permanent record.
They don't want that.
You have to remember that these guys, they start with the premise that no law or fact will be tried in their courts.
Correct.
That should scare the shit out of everybody.
No kidding.
So that's why we don't have access to the Seventh Amendment, correct, guaranteed right to a trial by jury. Why? Because number one, the Bar Association, again, these are former Americans, in my opinion, because they took an oath to a foreign entity, who are now in control of the court. So when you realize, I mean, just put yourself in their position for 2 seconds.
Okay.
Okay, you went to law school, you spent 60, 80 grand. Now you're sitting here, you got a wife and kids, you have to go ahead and try to repay all these loans. If you've watched The Firm with Tom Cruise, that's exactly what this is. These guys all know they're part of a very exclusive club. And I don't care where you're at in this world or what you do for a living. If you find that your testicles are now on the chopping block, who is the first person they call? They call their lawyer. Why? Because that's who controls these commercial courts. This is why, as an independent nation who is sovereign and we have the right to have our own courts, if we are the only indigenous tribe of sovereign Americans, wouldn't that necessarily mean that we have the right to also manage anybody who's operating in our territories? i.e., we have a right to demand that they have a license. Why? Because now we're handling this ourselves. Why? Because you've proven that you will not follow the law. Congratulations, you earned it. That's why. It's because we're law-abiding Americans. So we have to undo the presumptions utilizing God's law, because the power that is in you is far greater than the power that is in them who control this world. You will notice that I often quote scripture, because if you live by that, there's no way that they can assume that you live by theirs. There was a guy that went into court and literally did nothing but answered every single question using biblical scripture, and they quickly lost interest. Why is that? Because when it gets to learned men and women who are at the upper levels, and again, especially if they're threatened with this becoming public because it's part of the, secondary processes, that's when they're going to be like, what, Ro Raggy? What happens if we get enough Americans awake overnight? What happens if you have some pissed off chief that starts his own tribe? He adopts all law-abiding Americans, except for Bar Association members. They're excluded. Why? Because unless they have filed something on the record stating that they refute and they now rescind any foreign allegiances, that means they must have meant to do it.
Correct.
But even by filing that, all that does is take the death penalty off the table in their case, according to the assumptions that our grand jury members and all of our members within all trials by jury within the common law / exclusive equity jurisdictional courts of the Mahto tribe will assume.
When you say it like that, it makes sense, because they must realize that their lives literally are on the line if they don't uphold this farce.
Their lives are on the line because they participated in trafficking this many offspring since 1992, when our fondling father, Billy Clinton, passed the laws allowing them to do it.
Yes.
That's
Last
why they're
question.
afraid of Trump.
Go ahead.
That's why they're afraid of Trump, because he's changing it all.
And we've adopted him unofficially.
No, the chief has adopted him. Again,
Yes,
now,
exactly.
I kind of touched on that a little bit. Again, that's one of the few things that doesn't pass to the subsequent chiefs. Why? Because I don't trust him to do it, number one, and I don't think the people should. But,
Correct.
in my case, I follow my people. I'm their servant. So I'm okay with me having it until the time is right where I shouldn't too. Fine, I'm open to that. But at the end of the day, nobody else, to my knowledge, has ever put this together, nor did they have the authority. It says in the Indian Reorganization Act, if you're not part of an, federally recognized indigenous tribe, you're just another European person or man or woman coming in claiming your society somehow trumps everybody else's. But if you were part of the only indigenous tribe of state citizens and they were first in line to claim superior title to all the lands, okay, show up and argue with our chief. If you think you can take him in federal or state court, go ahead. And I'm talking about our courts, not theirs. Why? Because by speaking to me, just like you walking into their court, by speaking to me or one of my members without permission, they subject themselves to our courts. We didn't tell them to stop us. We didn't tell you, hey, can you make sure that I don't get to travel from here to here without your permission? No. Did I tell you to turn on your emergency lights for a non-emergency matter? No. Did I tell you to walk up and demand a driver's license and registration from me? The last officer that did that, I literally told him, I was like, do you have any idea what would happen to you if you weren't wearing a uniform and you walked up to me and said that? It was like, you wouldn't have a good day. But you think because there's a license plate on the back of that personal conveyance that it belongs to your state, and in their world it does. You have to read the contract at the dealership. Why will they not allow you to leave that dealership without licensing it with the state? Who licenses them? Who has the ability to jerk their livelihood away in an instant if they do not comply? That's why they make sure that you're giving your property to their state. That way, they can charge you for the privilege of being able to own their property each year, and it's based on the value of the vehicle. Notice I referred to it as a vehicle and not a personal conveyance because, again, they use legalese. It is a completely separate foreign language. That's why in the Mahto tribe, Assiniboine Sioux, Hebrew, and at least 3 other foreign languages are specified. That way they can't assume that I'm talking legalese, right? That's what all these assumptions have in common. What language are they in, men?
Well, we're in English.
I asked about them. They are in legalese, right?
Yes, correct.
And legalese is designed to confound a few things, namely an individual, a person, a human being, an entity, a state, an organization. All of these are referring to corporate entities. The 2 words that do not appear in their language are man and woman. They have human being, which we already discussed, means monster, means they cannot own property. That's why they are paying taxes on property, and they've been deluded into believing that they are owners rather than tenants in common. Why? Because the assumption is when they receive that tax bill, they didn't correct it. Whose obligation is to correct it? They sent you something in commerce. They claim that you guys have some matter that you need to resolve. Robert had made a very, very profound statement after we were discussing some other things at length. He said, when you truly overstand or understand all of this, you have nothing to be afraid of. Why do you have nothing to be afraid of? Because you can walk in and stand on your square. You understand exactly how you got there. You've memorized these assumptions, not necessarily each one of them individually. That's irrelevant. What you need to really, really memorize is the spirit of these. It does not matter what comes out of that man or woman's mouth who is working for Satan in the title section 666 program or these Nisi Prius courts. All that is going to matter, and I'm speaking to men. Do you know who you are?
Yes.
Do you have enough sack to stand up and speak on your own behalf? Because if that happens and you walk in with the faith of a mustard seed, you can tell that mountain to jump into that ocean and it will. You remember, these guys all know who they are. So the second you walk in and you let them know that not only do you know who they are, but guess what? Here's the assumptions that have been refuted on the record. Why? Because I put an affidavit there and none of your superstars yet, your lesser litigators, have stood up to tell me it's wrong. And until it shows up on the public record, it does not exist. We may as well be reading the Lord of the Rings trilogy and debating whether or not Gandalf has a right length to his cane, or discussing the number of licks it takes to get to the center of a Tootsie Roll Tootsie Pop, because those two are really relevant and important things. So when we speak to our public servants, we speak to them with love. We speak to them with kindness, with the assumption that they are literally operating at an average 85 IQ in a lot of cases. And that's not a slam, it's a fact. And that they were raised in this public school system, and that they too were indoctrinated and programmed just like you and I were. So before we castigate or in some way trammel the relationship between ourselves and our fellow Americans, remember, they are looking to you, men. They are looking to you as leaders. Because while they may wish to act, they may wish to get into the fight, a lot of times they don't know which direction to go. They don't know who in the hell to join. This is why, to be a fully enrolled member in this tribe, you must pass a test proving you have a right to put my father's name on you, to represent my people. Why? Because if you had encountered an Assiniboine and Sioux warrior on the prairie 400 years ago, that was the most unrelenting, unmitigating man that you could have ever encountered, with an absolute unparalleled love for his family and traditions of bravery that were so ensconced in our people that we had an actual animal we designated, the dog, as a loyal, fearless band of American Indians. The Cheyenne, the Arapaho, a lot of these other nations also had their own. Imagine, though, how we all picked the same animal. Why does my tribe have the name Bear? It's because it's part of our family name. How did you get your name? It was by your actions, generally. It's how you got your Indian name. Somebody saw something, or your medicine man had a vision. Based on what? Based on you, based on your characteristics. This is why the chief asks that if you join the tribe, you give notice of what your Indian name is. Why? Because that's yours. Your father should give it to you. If you don't have a father, your oldest brother. If you don't have that, your uncle or somebody else of male authority. Why? Because they are presumed to have the connection with the Most High. This is why women do not speak in tribal council meetings. It's not because we have something against women. It's because her guide on this earth is supposed to be her husband. She is his helpmate. You have no business preaching anything to another man's wife. She's to wait, be silent, and then go home and ask him. Why? Because she's his problem, not the congregation's. That's why. And he's the one that's expected to be able to grasp what's being said. The same is the reason why we only have men on our tribal councils. Why? So that we never have an estrogen decision. It is based on logic. And because the men are the ones who are the natural protectors. If the child is scared, who does he run to? He runs to mommy. If a child is being belligerent, to mom. How long does it take dad to get that child in line? About 2 seconds, if even that. Because the father is the Aleph of that home. The father is the one that's there to protect. The Mahto tribe, you and your villages, and every one of our counties, that's your job. Truth be told, the offspring own the villages in terms of who are the royalty in any Mahto village. It is the offspring. It's not the chief. It's not the village council members. It is the offspring. This is specifically why we have such a strict requirement in the village that if you are ever found with a child that is not your own, that is a criminal offense. Any adult finds a child alone, dare to retreat to a safe distance, record it. Why? Because for your safety, That kid's safer than a Hindu cow inside of Mahto village. Why? Because the veterans live on the borders of the village. Not a good idea if you want to try to go through them to get to the babies. But even in our orphanages, kids are protected, segregated from older kids. Why is this? Because when I was doing my bachelor's degree in criminal justice, we had to read about a thing called the Provo experiment. I highly recommend you read about that. Because this guy took a bunch of delinquents and he stuck them in a room. They were all court ordered there by the judge. And he waited and he watched. And what happened? They all sat around bragging for about 2 or 3 hours about what they had done, who they were, big and bad, peacocking for their fellow delinquents. Until he came back in and one of them finally asked the question, why are we in this room? Light bulb. Why don't you start talking about why you guys did what you did? And then he left. So here's what happens. These guys start talking about why they did it. And before you know it, they had found a group therapy that worked, similar to AA without the 12 steps. Then what happens when you bring a new delinquent into the room? What does the new delinquent automatically want to do? He wants to impress his fellow peers. So he begins bragging about all of his exploits. What do you think he gets? What he gets is negative feedback in the form of positive affirmation. What do you mean by that? Instead of getting a negative response from one of his peers, he has a peer telling him, yeah, this is why I did that too. In other words, I'm not acknowledging your act as though that is something to be lauded. I'm telling you, in spite of the fact that you clearly have been slapping yourself with a leather glove in a corner far too long, you have an opportunity to be able to rise above that and actually be a good contributing member of society. Now, would you believe that they had a less than 10% recidivist offender rate?
That's shocking.
So, of course, what did they do? They stopped the program. Why? Because we have private prisons. And because they have a mandate to keep a certain number of those prison beds filled. Now, people, do you understand how the matrix works? This is what it means to buy and sell the souls of men. It means that every American Indian that was born on this land was converted without our knowledge or informed consent to a U.S. citizen, British territorial subject, and property of the Vatican. So by joining the Mahto tribe, starting a Mahto village, electing a territorial council or your national council of territorial chiefs, you were engaged in a seminal process as outlined in the preamble to the Declaration, that when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government. I'll stop there because I do not throw off governments. Why? Because I have read Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Because I have read where it says, be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. So why would I come up against a superior enemy in technology, in force, when the offspring within all of those militaries belong to us? That's impressively stupid. Anybody out there who is loyal to us is obviously going to be our babies. Duh. All we need to do is show them, hey, that dad energy just showed up. That energy where dad didn't get his nap, and now everybody's going to hear about it. Who is that? Those are those Mahto veteran guys. They're the ones rolling around with that plate that has the dog tags. Did you ever talk to one of those guys? They record all stops. Why? Because that way they can educate each other. Starting with the existing law enforcement agencies that work for these foreign corporate entities that are purposely trained by the bar to violate the rights of their fellow Americans. That's who we need to be speaking to, men. That is the ministry that you have if you're a Mahto tribal member. Your ministry is to educate first and foremost. if you're in any Mahto village orphanage or any university, the primary goal and obligation of every offspring or every man, woman, or child is to educate. I'll close with this. Why? Because the founding fathers in their writings were replete with the fact that our form of government will not survive in an ignorant electorate. So this is why your unqualified chief servant has come forth to put this in front of you. I pray that you guys take this, utilize it in the spirit of love in which it is offered. I say this in the name of Yahuwah. Thank you for your time. Now, are there any questions?
I do have one more if somebody else doesn't have one.
Go ahead.
So when they called me into court, it was based on a corporation, even though they're only going to call people in based on their corporation and they don't know it. They think they're that person. Is it any different how I would approach things representing a corporation that I've created through the state than if it's the own one that they created for me, my all caps name question?
When you're doing your tax return, when you're treating it as though it is a separate and third person in the room with you and your bride, that's exactly how they're going to look at it. So if you're filing now, it may not be the same form. So for instance, if it is a certain type of organization, there may be a different number form that accomplishes the same purpose, i.e., it's reporting what the gross income was or the net income, something to that effect. But keep in mind, for the Mahto Church, Mahto Ministries, it has the EIN up there. It has the autograph of the chief in the capacity of the senior pastor, right, and agent in commerce. However, whether or not there are numbers on there are irrelevant. Why? Because once it's converted to wampum, it's private. Everything in the public, that's their domain. Any loans that the village makes to outside entities, you can charge interest on that. Those get filed and registered with the proper SEC, UCC authorities. Anything that's done on the back end, that's trust, that's ministry, that would not apply. Does that kind of help illustrate that a little?
I'm not quite sure. I don't follow all that because if I'm in court on a case and they're bringing forth a corporation that I created, is it the same as if I was in a court case where they were bringing suit against my all cap names? Is it the same kind of languaging I would use, same kind of documents? Is there something special or something different?
Remember, your court is the paperwork. So on the heading of the paperwork, right? If you say in the state of California, that's different than saying in the Republic of California, which means that you're telling them what controlling law is for that case. You might be in an admiralty jurisdiction, but you have a point that you could argue there. However, you're going to be treating that entity as a separate entity from you, regardless of whether or not it's your all caps name or whether or not it's some LLC. Let me put it this way. The sole member of your LLC ultimately leads back to you, as does the sole member of the all caps entity lead back to you as the implied surety.
Okay, so I can still tell them, hey, I'm the beneficiary. You're still trying to make me the trustee.
You see, he's trying to stand in as beneficiary, right?
Correct.
So if you wanted to come in with big dog energy, that would be having a hold harmless agreement that basically says, or a power of attorney that says that you have the right to come in and represent that dead entity and that you are held harmless. You're indemnified. They can't hold your body as surety for any debts they want to create.
So I do have that in the court case.
Who has that in? Is it Troy James Munson in all caps? Or have you filed a special notice or notice of special appearance, and have you changed your name to something that is not that all caps name?
I have not done that.
So you have a driver's license in the all caps name.
Yeah.
That's the evidence the judge is going to look at and laugh at you.
Got it.
What if he does it by jurisdiction instead of doing it by his name because you're playing in their court roles?
They
What
won't move
about
forward
jurisdiction?
unless somebody cops to the name.
Well,
If you notice that, the judge makes you state your name first, period, before they will do anything, because they cannot obtain jurisdiction unless they have a first and a last name. Some guys have gotten out of it just by stating, I go by whatever, Cloud. What's your last name? I don't have one. It's Cloud. That's it. You know, and they've had to dismiss cases because of that, because they can't move forward.
yeah, but he doesn't need to go change his name and file a name change because he's already got his name change in his live birth. What it is he needs to drive jurisdiction between the corporate name and his sovereign name.
They already have jurisdiction, even though jurisdiction can be challenged at any time, even after appeal. They are currently in the process of a case. If he went in and tried to challenge jurisdiction now, the judge, again, I've seen it a lot of times, is going to move forward. Why? Because there's nothing on the record stating that he's not the all caps name. Unless it's an LLC and it's a completely different name than him, fine. But even then, you have to have an attorney if you're in court with a corporate entity. It's in their laws. What
So
is the
how do
only?
you get out of it? How do you get out of it?
That's the hold harmless and power of attorney. Remember, who autographs the power of attorney? You do.
Yes.
That means that you're already an attorney, or you couldn't give it away. That's what you're doing with that. But you have to make that separation, or they're going to pretend it's you, because otherwise they won't be able to file and pretend that they're the beneficiaries.
So that's why they asked me if I was an attorney when I had that in there, because they knew they could disregard that document.
Well, again, it depends on how you do it, right? So, hey, judge, I'm admitting this as exhibit blah, right? If the judge says no and the judge doesn't have it, that's a clear win on the appeal, right? Remember, they win 98% of these cases that go to trial. Why? Because it's rigged.
Yeah.
So I had a question.
Mhm.
If he was to write a letter to the court saying, hey, I realized after the fact that you asked me if I wanted to allow them to just exclude me. Can I accept that offer still?
Remember, you're trying to put the toothpaste back in the bottle if you guys are going in and doing that. In my opinion, the best thing to do is to settle it. Now the court has no controversy. Remember, the jury is ultimately a trier of fact, and the administrator is there to settle a controversy between the parties. But if there is no controversy, what the hell are they have to adjudicate? They have to dismiss.
Can he ask them for a bill of sale then, or
It's called a bill of particulars.
particulars?
So if you want them to lay out exactly what it is, you can ask for that. Another thing that you can do is you can tell them, Judge, I want the charges read into the record. They will not do that. Why? Because if they read the charges into the record now, they're actually giving testimony in public accusing somebody of a statutory color of law admiralty offense. They want to remain in a position where they have not put anything on the record that can prove that they're acting outside of a fiduciary trustee capacity, because they do have an obligation to still follow the laws for the republic. So if they've put their voice or their evidence on the record, that obviously is clearly going to put their cojones in a sling. Any other questions? All right. Well, I will close this out for today. Thank you again so much, everybody. Robert, are you still there? And did you have anything you wanted to add, brother? Might have lost him. I know he's been listening, but he's also working off and on. So, all right. If there are no other questions or anything, then I'll go ahead and close this out for today, and we will look forward to doing it again tomorrow. Thank all so much. I look forward to you guys, and I admire and appreciate every one of you.